Okay, so first things first, I'm going to slow cook the pork filling or the pork meat for these tamales. It's somewhere between 4 to 5 pounds of pork country style ribs, and it does have a little bit of the bone in it. I typically like to use the pork shoulder roast or the Boston butt cut of pork, but it was not available when I needed it. So I'm kind of improvising and using this cut of meat. I'm going to add 1 or 2 bay leaves, half a piece of a small onion in there. I'm also going in with 4 mashed cloves of garlic. I just kind of gave them a press. I'm going in with 1 teaspoon of cracked black pepper, 2½ teaspoons of salt, 2 cups of low sodium chicken broth. Now I'm going to set my slow cooker to high, and this is going to cook somewhere between 4 to 6 hours or until the meat is tender. Okay, so this is now tender. I actually let this go for about 6 hours, and you can see it's falling apart. So I am going to remove it from the crock pot, and I'm going to reserve the broth and fat as well. Okay, so for the corn husks, I am using 1 bag. I believe it's a pound bag. I could be wrong. I'll put it somewhere here at the bottom. So I took them out of the bag, and these are fairly soft already, but sometimes I get bags of corn husks and they are super dry, like stiff as a board. So what I like to do is soak them in cold water, separate them, and give them a good rinse to remove any debris. You'll want to make sure you do that. Now that they are rinsed and separated, I have them here in a pot of water, and once it comes up to a boil, I'm just going to let them steep for several hours. And this is a great way to soften the corn husks. It makes them a lot more pliable to fold and create your tamal. Okay, so this water, I had to lower the heat. It was boiling. I'm just going to make sure these are submerged. And if you want to put something heavy on top, you can. I'm just going to dunk them like that. And I'm going to shut off the heat and let these soak for an hour or so, or until I need them. That's just going to make them soft and pliable and easy to work with. Okay, so let's go over what I like to use in my recipe. By the way, I'm just going to preemptively say, if you cannot find the chile pasilla or the chile ancho, you can use just the guajillo. If you want to use 12 Guajillo Chiles, that definitely works. This is just the combination I like to use. And I want to show you, this is 1 large Ancho Chile. Typically, well, let me show you. I'm working out of my own cookbook. By the way, check the description below to where you can get your copy. Here in the recipe, I have 2 dried Ancho Chiles. This one is really large, so I'm just going to use 1. But typically I find them and they're a lot smaller, kind of like this and even smaller. So that's just, so if you see me use 1 and not 2, that's why. This one's really large. And I'm going to be using 8 Guajillo Chiles and 2 Pasilla. I am going to remove the stem, the seeds, and give the flesh a really good rinse, because check that out. These come with a lot of debris on them. Okay, so my chilies are cleaned, rinsed, seeds are removed, the stems are removed, and I have them in a pot of water. To the pot of water, I'm also going to add half of a small onion and 3 to 4 cloves of garlic right into the pot. And I'm going to bring this up to a boil. Now that it's boiling, I'm going to shut off the heat, and I'm going to let this steep until everything is softened, and that could take 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, so now that my chilies are softened, I'm going to add them right into the blender cup. And I personally do not like to use the broth or the boiling liquid from the softened chilies. I mean, you can if you want, but I prefer to use broth. Okay, so onions, garlic, all the softened chilies are in there. So now I'm going to add 1 cup of my broth. This is the broth that I ended up with from the crock pot when I cooked my meat. So now I'm going to puree this well. Okay, so my chili puree is done. And I am going to reserve about a third cup is going to go into the masa dough, and the rest I'm going to combine it with the meat. Okay, so I'm going to work on the meat filling. So here, I'm not even going to add oil because the fat that rendered from the pork meat, it's enough. I'm going to add that. Now for the chili puree, I typically like to strain my puree, but because I used my Vitamix today, it really pureed it well. I didn't have to add a little extra broth to run it through a fine wire mesh strainer. But if you have a blender that really doesn't break it down and puree well, then you're probably going to want to strain it. At least that's what I prefer to do. So I made a little bit extra chili puree because I'm going to use it for another recipe later. But if you follow the recipe, whatever is left from the chili puree, aside from the quarter cup to third cup that you use in the masa, just add it to your meat. So I'm going to combine this well, and this is the part where you want to taste your meat filling, and if you want to add salt, if you want to add some chicken bouillon powder, some extra seasoning, spices, this is the time to do it. Give that a mix, and this is done. Okay, so I'm going to prepare the masa. Here I have 4 cups of instant corn flour for masa. I'm going to add to my 4 cups of instant corn flour, I'm adding 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 2 teaspoons of salt. Give that a mix. Now I'm going to add about a cup of my shortening here. Again, you could use lard. Now, if you want to use oil, then I would suggest starting with a half cup of oil. If you start with a full cup of oil, I think it's just going to be just a soggy mess. So I would say a half cup. So I'm going to kind of break apart this shortening or lard or whatever it is you're using that's softened here, and mix it in. And things will get messy. Clean hands are always your best friend in the kitchen. So now I'm going to take my pork broth from the stewed meat, and I'm going to start with about a cup, another cup, and work that in. Okay, so at this point I've worked in close to 3 cups of my broth, but now I'm going to add a little bit of this chili puree, like a quarter cup to a third cup. And now I'm going to mix it in. And I should say that the chili puree is optional, because I know some people just don't add chili puree, but my grandma, my abuelita Faz, she added the puree to the masa. It gave it good flavor and color. What you're ultimately trying to achieve is a soft masa dough that goes through your hands like that. So now I'm going to whip this with my hand. You could use a hand mixer if you have one strong enough for this, but I'm going to mix and whip the masa for about 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, so my masa is combined, mixed, and hand whipped very well. So I just put some cling wrap on the top because I don't want it to dry out, but I do want it to set until I need it. Okay, so to put these together, you're going to take your softened, pliable, pre-soaked corn husk, and there is a smooth side and a rough side. Sometimes it's hard to tell, but for the most part, you can just kind of feel it. So this is the smooth side. I'm going to take some of my masa and spread it. And I don't have large hands, so my tamal is probably not going to be maybe as large as yours is. And actually, I'm going to take a little bit off of the top because this will kind of puff up and kind of spill out. You don't want to bring the dough all the way to the top. Okay, so here is my corn husk with masa. By the way, there are so many different ways that you can spread the masa on here. There are those little masa spreaders. You could use your tortilla press. I've seen that done before. I just use a little wooden spoon and kind of spread it. Okay, so now I'm going to add my meat filling right in the center. There we go. Now just roll it this way, roll it that way, and fold up once, and that's it. Some people like to take extra corn husk, like strips, and tie it around. That makes a cute little package, but this is how I do it. So onto a baking sheet, and I'm just going to repeat the process. Okay, so here is what I managed to get out of today's batch of tamales. I managed to get 3 dozens of tamales. That's 36. So here I have this is a 16 quart pot, I believe. And I have a small little heat-proof cup. This will withstand the heat. I'm going to place that right in the center, and I've added around 2 quarts of water underneath this little steamer basket. Basically, you want to fill the water right before it comes out of the steamer basket. You don't want your tamal to sit in the water. So now I'm just going to stack my tamales around the cup. Okay, so all of my tamales are stacked facing upright. And now I'm going to take extra corn husks that just were too small and just cover the top. And it kind of helps if you tuck in like the thin part and fold it over, and it creates like this umbrella over your tamales. Now I'm just going to take this tea cloth or cheesecloth, I don't know what you want to call it, just a clean cloth, and you cover it. So I'm going to get this on the stove. Okay, so I have the heat on. I'm going to add the lid here, put the lid on top. Once the water comes up to a rolling boil, make sure it stays at a constant rolling boil. You may have to add water throughout the cook process, but it's going to take at least an hour and a half or so to get these cooked through. So once the water gets to the point where everything's steaming and boiling, I went ahead and turned it down lower because I just want it at a constant boil. And this is the time where you start to count your cook time. Don't start your cook time before the water boils, because then you're going to be like, oh, at an hour and 30 minutes, it's not done. So once it gets to the steamy boiling part of this process, that's when you start counting your cook time. So I'm going to let this go for about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half, and I'll check the first tamal. So I'm just going to carefully peel this back here and just try to not burn myself. The best way to test this is just carefully see if you can remove it from the husk. And it's almost there. You see how it kind of stuck here to the husk? That means it still needs to cook a little bit more. But for the most part, yeah, it's coming off fairly easy. So it's almost done. I'm going to give it another, I'd say about 20 minutes. I am going to let my tamales to continue cooking, and I just want to reiterate that cook time does always vary. Especially for right now, I have my water at a constant rapid simmer, but if it is at a hard boil, it will definitely progress things a lot quicker. But you are probably going to need to add more water, and the way you do that is you pour the water down the side of the pot, never directly over the tamales. That'll just create more work for yourself, and just it'll make a mess. It also depends how tightly packed you have your pot. That also adds more cook time to get the tamales to cook through and set. And the ultimate tip I can give you is, after about an hour and 15 minutes, take one out and test it. As soon as your tamal slips right out of the corn husk without sticking to the corn husk, that lets you know, that's a good indication that your tamal is set and it's done. So at that point, I would shut off the heat, remove them from the pot onto a baking sheet, and then let them set for 20 minutes, then serve. So hopefully that helps you if you are trying this recipe or just making tamales at home. So here's my second test one, and this one, oh yeah, see how it doesn't really stick? Now it will need to set, but this is coming out a lot easier from the corn husk. See? Yay! This looks, ooh, it's hot. That looks fantastic. Okay, so I have removed them from the pot. I'm going to let these set for about 15 to 20 minutes. Actually, I say 15, really around 20 would be better, but I can't tell you, the people behind me really want tamales. My son's like, Mom, I want another one. So I'm gonna let these set and I will show you the finished product. Okay, so let's get, these have set for about 10 minutes or so. That came out easily. And you can add your salsa, hot sauce. And yes, I even have people in my family that add ketchup. I know. You don't gotta tell me. I know. But add what you like. But I'm gonna break into this so you could see how tender and soft these are. There we go. I like to think this is an easy recipe. Yes, it's a lot of work, but I don't know. I like making tamales when I have time. It's a great way to have the family sit around the table and, you know, make a meal. I hope you give this recipe a try. I hope you like it, and thanks for watching.